Hello guys, we continue the study of our Sugya. You should have your Gemara open to the right page, Dalet Amud Aleph. And you should also have your workbook open to page 32. Feel free to pause the video whenever you need. So to summarize or to review what we did at the top is the Gemara at this point thinks that there is a good proof from the case of Mezuza, because in Mezuza we know that the tenant has to put up the Mezuza. So the Gemara assumes that just like in the case of Mezuza, the tenant has to do it, so it follows logically that in the case of Bedika, also the tenant should do the Bedika. But it's important to understand what the Gemara here is assuming. The Gemara is assuming the following. The question that the Gemara expressed regarding Bedika is because we have two factors. We have on the one hand the idea of owning the Chametz. On the other hand we have the domain, control of the domain. And the Gemara wanted to know which of those two things is stronger to determine the obligation. If ownership of the Chametz is stronger, then obviously the landlord would have to do Bedika. But if domain, control of the domain is more important, then the tenant would have to do the Bedika. And that's what the Gemara is wondering. We don't know which of these two reasons prevails. The Gemara, in bringing the case of Mezuza, believes that it has the answer, because Mezuza seems to be a case where we also have two factors. On the one hand, ownership of the home, of the residence, which is analogous to owning the Chametz. On the other hand, we have control of the domain, that there is a tenant who is now in control of the domain. He has the rights. And since we see by Mezuza that domain prevails over ownership, so the same thing should happen by Chametz, that domain prevails over the ownership of the landlord, and therefore the tenant has to do the Bedika. So what the Gemara does now is goes to reject this comparison. This proof is dismissed, and we're over here. Hasam there, meaning in the case of Mezuza, Ha'asa Amar Rav Meshashe Mezuza Chovas Hadarhi. Mezuza is the obligation of the resident, meaning only of the resident. In other words, Mezuza is not a good case to establish which of the two factors is stronger, because in Mezuza there's only one thing that is relevant, and that is, do you or don't you reside there? Ownership when it comes to Mezuza is not relevant. So therefore a person, as we mentioned before in class, a person can own property and yet be potter from having a Mezuza on the doors because he doesn't reside there. He has no storage there, he doesn't work there. The fact that he owns it by itself, that is not enough to obligate a person in Mezuza. And therefore Mezuza does not illustrate a conflict between two factors and then show us which of the two is stronger. Whereas in Bedika, we do have two factors, so we still don't know what's stronger. The simple mashal that I can give you is, imagine if you have two boxers. If boxer A and boxer B fight, and at the end of the 10-round fight, A prevails, so now you know that fighter A is boxer A is defeated boxer B. But if boxer A is the only one in the ring and he's the person who remains standing, obviously he doesn't show that he defeated B because B is not in the ring. So the same thing, Mezuza is not a conflict between two factors that we should be able to decide that residence is more important than ownership, because ownership is not in the ring. Ownership is not relevant in Mezuza. But it is very much relevant in Bedika, and therefore at this point the Talmidim, as Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Achamai, so what's the halacha when it comes to Bedika? Because we cannot use the case of Mezuza to settle our dilemma. So at this point, you should look in your workbook in question number 9. The Gemara now rejects this attempted proof, and it says, Hasam ha'amar Rav Mesharshe. There surely Rav Mesharshe said, Mezuza chovas hadarhi. Mezuza is the obligation only of the resident. The word only is not here, but that's important because that's what the Gemara is driving. That's the point that Gemara is making, that it's only resident. Okay, let's take a look at the Rashi. And for Rashi, we have a few words that you should write the translation. Number 1, E is if, Number two, Hesech Hadas is an important concept in halacha, which literally means to take your mind away or to be distracted. Number three, Afar is dust. K, the prefix K means like. 5, you have it. 6, Gavna is a case. And 7, Toreach is, you might remember from last year that Nafish Tirchayu. Tircha is a bother or effort. There's a couple of key terms in this Rashi which are helpful to know. Lefi means because, and that of course brings a reason. Ksiv means it's written, and that introduces a pasuk, Torah Shebechtav. And Mishum, because, is also a reason. Okay, so the Rashi is found in Lazos. The Rashi is Chovas Adar, right over here. Says Rashi, what the Gemara means to say when it says that it's the obligation of the resident, so first Rashi explains why it is the obligation of the resident. And we're going to translate the Rashi line by line in your workbook. Lefi shei meshamartu, because it protects him, meaning the Mezuza protects the resident. And therefore it stands to reason that it's the resident who has to put the Mezuza. He's the one who benefits from the mitzvah. How do we know that? That is depending on residence. Uksiv, because it's written in the Torah, Beisecha. You should put quotation marks in the word Beisecha. That, of course, is part of the Shema, where it says, Al mezuzos Beisecha o Visharecha. So the pasuk says Beisecha, your house. So now we have an interesting explanation. Biatcha. The word Beitecha is explained by the Chazal as if it says Biatcha, you come in, venichnas, and you enter. Veyotz, and you go out from it. So that the word Beitecha is not interpreted meaning your house. That's not what obligates a person to put a mezuzah because you own it, but rather because it is biatcha, is the place where you come in. Nichnas veyotzeba, it's a place that you go in and out. So again, that's the concept of residence. It's not Beitecha, meaning your house. What makes it your house is the fact that you're nichnas veyotze, is the place where you live. Now, then Rashi says the following. So that's as far as Mezuza is concerned, and why Mezuza is dependent only on one factor, which is residence. Aval acha bedikas chametz derabanan. But here, the question about bedikas chametz is not on a Torah level, meaning the question is who does the mitzvah bedikas chametz, meaning which is a mitzvah of the Rabbanan at this point. Dehi mishum bali rayu bali matzeh, because as far as bali rayu bali matzeh is concerned, meaning as far as the problem of ownership of chametz, ha'amar lekaman desagile bebitol be'alma. We're going to learn later on, and God willing we'll get there in a couple of sugyos, but we're going to learn later on that it's enough if you do bitol by itself. Meaning that clearly the landlord here for sure has to do bitol. It's his chametz. So Bali Rayu Bali Matzah is avoided by the fact that the owner of the chametz does bittul chametz. But still there is something pending, and that is who is going to do bedika, because bedika is a mitzvah de Rabbanan at this point. Once bittul is done, that takes care of the Torah requirement of disowning chametz. And the question now becomes, Medurabanan, this mitzvah, who has to do the mitzvah bedika? And that's where we're in the Gemara. Should the landlord do it because it's his chametz, meaning he is the one who has to deal with it, do bedika and bitul? Or perhaps we should say that no, the owner does the bitul, and now the tenant has to do the bedika because he's the one who is in control of the domain. And then Rashi explains, next page, and how do you do this bitul? If you take your mind away from it, and you consider it as dust, and you declare that all the chametz that are in this house, etc. Meaning, if a person declares that the chametz that is in the house is like dust of the earth, that's what Rashi means by being distracted, taking away your mind from it, meaning that it becomes unimportant in your eyes. Then that's what bitul chametz is according to Rashi, that you regard as dirt, as dust, as something that is insignificant. So that is the question: who has to do the bedika? But the bitul already takes care of the ownership of chametz, and Rashi instructs us as how the bitul is done. Next line in Rashi. V'Rabbanan hu de'atzrich bedika. So now once bittul is done, so the Rabbanan required to do bedika as a safeguard. Ve'ashta ki hai gavnai, now in this type of case where there is a split, meaning the owner for sure has to do bittul, and now bedika still has to be done because that's a rabbinic requirement. So we're asking mivailan, we're asking toreach ze al mi mutal, who has to do this chore, who has to do this, who has to bother to do the bedika? Who should we put the obligation on? Okay, questions on this Rashi. Why is the socher the one that has who is mechuyev to put up the mezuzah? Because he's the one who gets protection from being in the house with the mezuzah. How is the word beitecha interpreted? Beitecha is interpreted as if it were to say place where you come in, as if there is an aleph, meaning that you come in and go out. If the word beitecha would be taken literally, who would be mechuyev to put up the mezuzah? Well, if beitecha would be literally, that's your house, then clearly that would be that would be the landlord. Why? Because it's that he owns it. But Chazal did not interpret the word beitecha literally, meaning that it's not ownership that makes it your house, but rather the fact that you come in and you come out. That's the occupancy is what's critical. Number 3, why doesn't the masker have the chiyuv to place the mezuzah in the house? So now we know, because once he transfers the rights of the residence to the tenant, he has no business there. He doesn't go in there anymore. According to Rashi, the chiyuv to the bedika in a case in which the house is rented is not a chiyuv min Torah. Why not? Because the landlord has to do bitul chametz. It's his chametz. Nobody else can do bitul chametz. Only the owner. And once the owner does bitul chametz, then the obligation to the bedika is lowered, is degraded to a level of the Rabbanan, because it's not being done, as Rashi told us at the beginning, to avoid owning chametz. You already took care of that problem. Now bedika is being done for a different reason, because maybe you'll come to eat it. Okay. So if you go to question 11 in your workbook, the Gemara goes a little bit further and reinstates his question, Achamai, what is the halacha here? Meaning now that we know that mezuzah became an irrelevant case to our sugya, that it doesn't give us really the answer. So the Gemara says like this, Amar lehu Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said to them, Tanina, we learned this in a Braisa. The Braisa says, Amaskir bais lechaveru, and again, you don't have to translate the things that you already know. If somebody rents a house to his friend, imat shelo masar lo maftechot chal arba'asar, if he gave the keys before, if he gave the keys after the 14 started, meaning the 14 started before he gave over the keys, ala maskir livdok, then the landlord has to check. Why? Because he gave the keys after the 14th of Nisan started already, meaning when the 14th of Nisan started, meaning the night of Bedika, he had the keys in his hands. He only gave the keys after the 14th started. Then the landlord has to check. But if he gave the keys before the 14th started, then ala socher livdok. So what this is telling us is that it really depends on who has the keys at the critical time. What's the critical time? The moment when the night of the 14th of Nisan starts. Who has the keys at that time? It depends on the keys. Okay, so let's go a little bit further on page 34. So case is Masar is a mafteach lifnei yudalet, means he gave the keys before the 14th. So who's going to check? Good. So the tenant is going to check because he gave the keys before the 14th. But the second case, Masar is a mafteach be yudal, if he gave the keys in the 14th, meaning the 14th already started, so it's too late. Then the landlord has to do it because at the moment when the 14th of Nisan started, he had the keys in his hands. Number 2, Lefia Braisa Azos, Makovea. What determines who has to check? What determines is who has the keys, right? Who has the keys during the night of when the night of Bedika starts. Now, why should it depend on that? I'll leave that up to you because we're going to see that they are different